All rise, veuillez vous lever. Please be seated, veuillez vous asseoir. Madam Prosecutor, you have those numbers for us, please.
Yes, Your Honors. So the ERNs from the videos that were shown in the opening statement are as follows. For the France 24 reportage, it is car OTP 20920996. For the Al Jazeera reportage, it is car OTP 21071169. For the video regarding the victims of Bouali, it is car OTP 21080681. And for the report regarding Boda, it is car OTP 20665312.
Thank you very much. Before we move to the statements of the defense, the Chamber wishes to clarify that with reference to the opening statements of the common legal representative of victims, that the prosecution in the DCC has not brought any charge of rape allegedly committed by Mr. Mokom. This is to be clarified also for the public. There is not such charge in the DCC. Now, we turn to the defense, and we start with the unsworn statement of Mr. Mokom. Is that what you asked for?
Absolutely, Your Honor, but I wanted to thank you for clarifying this because I think it was important to mention it. And with that, Mr. Mokom can now start.
Mr. Mokom, the floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le juge. Monsieur le Président, Madame et Messieurs les juges, permettez-moi tout d'abord de vous remercier de m'avoir donné l'occasion de m'adresser à vous aujourd'hui, ainsi que pour le travail que vous avez fait pour mener à bien cette procédure jusqu'à présent. Je voudrais également saluer tous mes frères centrafricains, tous mes frères et sœurs centrafricains, centrafricaines. Comme vous avez vu sur les panneaux publicitaires partout dans le pays que le 22 août 2023, vous devez rester branchés sur les radios locales ainsi que la télévision pour écouter la vérité de la crise centrafricaine de 2013 à 2014. Monsieur le Président, Madame et Messieurs les juges, Groupe d'autodéfense Les Patriotes Anti-Balaka a été créé suite à une violation massive du droit international en République centrafricaine, comme ce qui s'est passé récemment en Ukraine. Il s'en est suivi les douloureux événements que tout le monde connaît et d'ailleurs relayés à bon escient par les sites d'information et les médias internationaux. Ceci a contribué à établir au grand jour notre impuissance à défendre notre propre territoire, notre incapacité à protéger nos propres enfants, à sauver l'honneur de nos propres épouses, nos mères et nos sœurs violées sous nos yeux, et à préserver nos propres parents de l'humiliation. Les morts ne se comptaient plus. Les viols, les braquages, les incendies des villages entiers, les pillages continuaient malheureusement à gagner le pays. Aucune ville, aucun quartier, aucun village n'est épargné par les exactions commises par la Séléka. Nous avons perdu notre dignité. Nous avons perdu notre fierté. Nous avons perdu notre honneur. Nous avons perdu notre souveraineté face à cette occupation et agression armée. Les leaders politiques se sont tus. Les forces de défense et de sécurité ont disparu. Les militaires rasaient les murs. L'administration était saccagée. Les droits de l'homme bafouillés. L'insécurité généralisée. Un vide juridique et institutionnel s'est installé. Bref, un état de non-droit, un état de jungle. Le peuple centrafricain a été, en cette période précise, abandonné à son propre sort. Il lui fallait organiser sa propre résistance par des actions d'autodéfense afin d'assurer sa survie face aux horreurs perpétrées par la Séléka. L'état de nécessité dans lequel était plongée la population centrafricaine exigeait de sa part le recours à des actes de légitime de défense, de protection personnelle et collective. D'où l'émergence de cette révolution populaire dénommée anti-Baraka. Pourquoi pas les Centrafricains pourraient-ils prendre les armes pour faire face à l'agression, comme la France l'a par exemple fait face à l'Allemagne lors de la Seconde Guerre mondiale? Pourquoi pas les Centrafricains? Pendant tout ce temps, je n'étais pas au pays. J'étais réfugié à Zongo, en République démocratique du Congo. Et je suis revenu le 15 février 2014 au pays pour rejoindre le mouvement d'autodéfense anti-Baraka. J'ai consacré mon retour à la recherche de la paix et non au fait de faire la guerre. Les anti-Baraka ont été diabolisés par certains à cause de leurs calculs politiques et pour l'intérêt de leurs amis. Les faits ont été falsifiés, politisés le 24 mars 2013, un dimanche. Un groupe de mercenaires appelé Coalition Rebelle Séléka, une consultation des mercenaires tchadiens, soudanais, nigériens, a envahi la RCA en occupant 73 sous-préfectures, 4 PCA, ainsi les 16 préfectures, y ont renversé le régime du président Bozizé. Du 24 mars à septembre 2013, il y a eu plus de 3000 morts et certains parents n'ont pu retrouver le corps de leurs proches. Plus de 200 000 personnes se sont réfugiées dans le pays voisin. 1,5 million ont été déplacés internes. Comme si cela ne suffisait pas, ils ont commencé à sortir les malades des hôpitaux et à les fusiller. Exemple, en avril 2013, à l'hôpital de l'Amitié, ils ont exécuté publiquement des malades de cet hôpital. À cette occasion, ils ont tué le comptable de l'ENERCA qui s'appelait 52 Vestes. Ils ont commencé à lancer des obus sur les églises, à l'exemple de l'église luthérienne de Cité Jean 23, qui a reçu des tonnes des obus un dimanche en plein culte, au vu et au su de tout le monde. Ils ont brûlé des églises, assassiné les prêtres et les pasteurs. Il y a un village de 1700 âmes aux alentours de la route de Mbri qui a disparu de la carte. Le village s'appelait Zaïre. Tous les bâtiments administratifs ont été détruits. Tous les commissariats de province ont occupé par des mercenaires de la Séléka. Face à tous ces agrégats, des filles et fils ont décidé de se lever comme un seul homme pour lancer le mouvement d'autodéfense anti-Baraka en septembre 2013. Certaines sont mortes et certaines sont vivantes. Ce n'est pas la petite personne de Mokom qui est à l'origine. Ils ont des fétiches, des pratiques traditionnelles. Ils ont commencé à rendre les gens invulnérables aux cartouches et aux roquettes. Grâce aux pratiques traditionnelles, c'est comme ça que les gens ont adhéré au mouvement et devenaient plus nombreux. Ils se sont transférés à Gobert, un endroit montagneux et difficile d'accès, en hauteur, d'où on peut voir les choses. On me reproche aujourd'hui des soi-disant crimes commis à Bangui et à Bossangwa en allant du 5 décembre 2013 à la fin du mois d'avril 2014, qui engageant directement ma responsabilité et qui auraient été commises dans le cadre d'un soi-disant plan pour reprendre le pouvoir. Je nie formellement avoir participé à un plan qui impliquerait la commission des crimes comme me reproche. Monsieur le Président, Madame et Messieurs les juges, je vous suis très reconnaissant de m'avoir donné l'occasion de partager cette information avec vous. Je suis convaincu que vous évaluerez équitablement les accusations dans ce procès. Et je vous remercie pour votre travail et votre diligence. Et je remercie également mon équipe de défense pour son soutien et pour tout le travail effectué. Que Dieu vous bénisse. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mokom. Monsieur La Rochelle, now the floor is yours. You have approximately 9 minutes left. Thank you very much.
Merci, Monsieur le juge. J'essaie une phrase en sango, puisque je sais que nous sommes écoutés dans les rues de Bangui. Et je vais dire Mbi Barala Kwe. Donc, mes salutations à tous ceux qui écoutent cette affaire aujourd'hui et mes remerciements également. D'abord à M. Mokom pour sa confiance, également à toute mon équipe pour son travail acharné au cours des derniers mois et à la Cour et à son personnel pour leur travail également pour mener à bien cette audience aujourd'hui. On a un procès aujourd'hui qui se tient dans le cadre de la situation de la Centrafrique 2. 9 ans d'enquête, messieurs et madame les juges, 9 ans d'enquête sur les violences en Centrafrique depuis 2012. Qu'est-ce que le procureur a remonté dans ses filets après 9 ans d'enquête? Saïd, un gardien de prison de la Séléka. Yekato Mengai Sona, pour les anti-Balaka, en prison aujourd'hui et en train de subir un procès. Et la petite personne de Maxime Mokom, pour qui vous allez devoir décider, au terme de cette audience, si vous le citez à procès lui aussi. C'est très peu, il me semble, lorsqu'on regarde et qu'on voit des images comme celles que le procureur vous a projetées ce matin, compte tenu de l'intensité et l'étendue de la violence qui a caractérisé le pays à la période qui nous intéresse. Où sont les cerveaux du plan derrière l'invasion de la Séléka? Ils en avaient, eux, des vraies armes, des uniformes militaires, des autos et des crimes qu'on peut relier effectivement à des gens et à des officiers, et même à des dirigeants politiques. Drôle de justice aussi, après toutes ces années pour les anti-Balaka. Pourquoi Angelo, cet anti-Balaka notoire, est en prison aujourd'hui, alors qu'un autre anti-Balaka notoire, tout aussi notoire, Thierry Lébéné, dirige une milice pour le compte du président Touadéra. 2 anti-Balaka notoires qui ont marché jusqu'à Bangui, qui ont suivi le même parcours, que vous retrouvez des milliers de fois dans la preuve du procureur, et qui ont subi un sort aussi différent. pourquoi Yekatom est en prison et que le capitaine Kamezolai, que Sébastien Winezui, que Léopold Barra, ces gens qui parlaient au nom des anti-Balaka après qu'ils aient repris Bangui, fièrement, qui les remerciaient d'avoir sauvé le pays, sont toujours en liberté. Pourquoi Gaïsona est en prison et Kokaté est témoin du procureur contre lui? Les deux étaient impliqués aussi dans la mise en place de ces coordinations qui ont tenté de s'occuper des anti-Balaka après la chute de Bangui le 5 décembre 2013. Pourquoi Mokom est ici devant vous et que Ndomaté, Winezui ont été ministres, ont occupé des postes importants auprès de la transition, auprès des gouvernements qui ont suivi, alors qu'ils étaient au cœur des événements en décembre 2013. Que font aujourd'hui Barra, Ngaya, Demafout, ces personnes qui se sont précipitées à Bangui pour profiter de la chute de la Séléka? Barra, la preuve le dit, Barra ne représentait pas les Balaka. C'est lui qui est allé à N'Djamena négocier la chute de Tchotodia. Envoyé là-bas par Demafout, qui était un ministre même de Tchotodia. Pourquoi Mokom est là? Qui l'accuse? On ne peut pas le dire. C'est un mystère. Un secret un peu, un secret de polichinelle. Mais un secret. On a quand même une idée. Parce que Demafout, il a témoigné publiquement. Kokaté, il a témoigné publiquement. Donc, ces gens qui ont profité du mouvement des anti-Balaka, qui ne tarissaient pas d'éloges à son égard en décembre 2013, aujourd'hui, pour des raisons d'opportunisme, pour des raisons qui leur appartiennent, se présentent devant les juges de cette cour et, comme le dit mon client, diabolisent le mouvement des anti-Balaka. Ce sont ces gens qu'on a entendus, de nombreux autres qu'on n'a pas entendus, mais que vous connaissez, que nous connaissons, qui permettent aujourd'hui au procureur de se lever dans cette cour et d'affirmer sans rougir que ces anti-Balaka qui ont marché, pour certains, nu-pieds de leur village jusqu'à Bangui, qui sont arrivés là sans nourriture, armés de leurs gris-gris et de leurs bouts de ficelle, constituaient un plan criminel. Demain, au cours des 3 heures qui me sont allouées, j'entends vous démontrer que ce projet criminel n'existe en réalité que dans la tête du procureur. Et vous pourrez voir, il a tenté vainement de l'insuffler dans la tête de ses témoins. Heureusement, je vais vous le montrer, certains savent résister aux suggestions qui leur sont faites. Vous verrez, il y a la preuve exculpatoire. Je vous montrerai qu'un examen réaliste et objectif de la preuve qui est devant vous ne permet absolument pas de supporter une quelconque accusation contre mon client. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Counsel. So we are done now with the opening statements. We will then start with the submissions on the merits. The prosecution will start, so the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Honor. We will again require access to Evidence Channel 2.
Well, we experienced a technical issue about the system, so we will take a break. Hopefully, we will start again in 10 minutes as soon as possible. Thank you very much. See you soon.
All right, we will. All right, we will be. Please be seated. We will as well.
Thank you very much for waiting. Now, the prosecution, the floor is yours. The countdown starts as of now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Honors. Mr. President, Your Honors, I will set out the prosecution's case against Mr. Mokom in the following 120 minutes. You have received our written submissions, and I will focus only on the key aspects of our evidence today. The prosecution will show that there are substantial grounds to believe that Mr. Mokom was an accessory to the crimes as charged, and therefore that he should be committed to trial. My presentation will focus on the evidence supporting the charged war crimes and crimes against humanity, and then I will focus on Mr. Mokom's individual criminal responsibility. As you have heard earlier today from the deputy prosecutor in his opening, the 5 December attacks on Bangui and Bossangoa did not take place in a vacuum. Rather, they fit a pattern of crimes against Muslim civilians that was reported by national and international media and raised concern in the international community. A pattern that started in September 2013 and continued for months after the attacks, which I will now discuss in detail. I will start with the charged crimes related to Bangui. In the early morning hours of 5th December 2013, around 1,500 anti-Balaka elements mounted a coordinated attack on Bangui. These elements were organized in several groups and were led by inter alia the following persons: Ivan Konate, Rodrigue Ngaibona, Thierry Lebene, Alfred Rombot Yekatom, and Charles Angramangu. Yekatom and Angramangu based themselves in Boeing, together with one Sylvestre Yaguzu, who would later become Mr. Mokom's deputy. Lebene, Konate, and Ngaibona, together with their elements, had moved from different directions in the weeks before to join forces at the outskirts of Bangui. One of those who encouraged them to attack the city and was involved in coordinating their efforts was Maxime Mokom. Mr. Mokom is charged with aiding and abetting, as well as otherwise contributing to the crimes of those anti-Balaka groups in Bangui on 5 December and the months afterwards until at least end of April 2014. Witnesses such as P1521, P2269, P0446, and P0884 describe how the attack unfolded in detail, and Your Honors have their accounts on the list of evidence. The anti-Balaka groups targeted the Seleka in Bangui at Camp Kasai, Camp de Roux, Camp de Sapeurs de Pompiers, Assemblée Nationale, and the Centre Protestant pour la Jeunesse. P0889 and P2232 state that Mr. Mokom contributed to this coordination of the attack by pushing the elements from the bush to Bangui. He was also involved in devising the strategy for the attack. I will get back to this later. This attack was initially not successful. Anti-Balaka groups retreated around Bangui and then regrouped to continue to attack in the following weeks until they had achieved Jatadia's resignation and the takeover of Bangui. Once the Seleka regime had been ousted, some of the former leaders of the attack became so-called comzones, which means zone commander, and the national coordination of the anti-Balaka was formalized. Mr. Mokom was then designated operations coordinator, which is also reflected in documentation you will see today. The prosecution's evidence establishes substantial grounds to believe that the charged crimes were committed in Bangui by anti-Balaka elements in the course of the attack, subsequent attacks until at least end of April 2014. Following the pattern of conduct we have seen in the prosecution's opening, the anti-Balaka turned against Muslim civilians. I will first address counts 2 and 3, attacks against buildings dedicated to religion. The anti-Balaka, who descended on Bangui, targeted religious buildings of the Muslim community, including mosques and prayer rooms. For count 2 and 3, the prosecution relies on the findings of the Commission of Inquiry, witness statements, as well as imagery of destruction. The evidence shows that anti-Balaka intentionally destroyed several mosques in the relevant time frame. Your Honors, to go into this issue, I would like to request a brief private session because I would like to reflect on what one witness says who would be identified.
Mr. Court Officer.
We're back in open session, Mr. President.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Your Honor, satellite imagery shows the destruction, for instance, of the Boeing Mosque. The big map on your screens indicates the location of the mosque in Bangui, and the inset squares contain zoomed pictures of the mosque area taken on different days. In these pictures, we can see that the mosque, which is the bigger building marked by the yellow circle, was intact on 27th November, but that its roof is missing by 8th December 2013. The pictures also show that not only the mosque, but also some adjacent buildings were destroyed. P2125 witnessed the anti-Balaka destroying this mosque. He recalls that they urinated on the Holy Quran, pillaged the building by removing carpets, roofs, doors, and even its walls. The witness also heard the anti-Balaka saying that they did not want to see Muslims there anymore. Witness P1339 recalls that one of the anti-Balaka leaders who took part in the 5 December attack, ordered to destroy Muslim houses and mosques, including this mosque. Based on the Commission of Inquiry's final report, at least 43 mosques were completely destroyed in the aftermath of the attack. The Commission of Inquiry visited the mosques of Fu, Boyrab, Miskin, Malimaka, and Engaragba, and could confirm that there was nothing left. The only mosques which were still intact were the few located near PK5. None of the damaged or destroyed mosques constituted a legitimate military objective, nor was their destruction justified by military necessity. Regarding counts 3 and 4, destruction of private properties and pillage of houses and shops. Your Honors, during the attack and its aftermath, the anti-Balaka also intentionally destroyed houses in predominantly Muslim neighborhoods of Bangui, such as Fu, Miskin, Combattant, Kina, Sara, PK5, Kokoro, Buka, PK12, and PK13. In a report, of which Your Honors can see an excerpt on the screens right now, UNOSAT assessed that 325 structures in the 3rd arrondissement, which includes PK5 and Kokoro, were destroyed. Between 22nd February 2014 and 6 June 2014, an additional 469 had been destroyed in the 3rd arrondissement. Again, according to the Commission of Inquiry report, over 1,300 buildings had been destroyed, most being located in the 3rd, 5th, and 8th arrondissement in Bangui, where the majority of the city's Muslims lived. Like for the mosques, the houses of Muslims were not destroyed by chance. P1339 and others recalled that they were ordered to destroy houses. As an example, Your Honors, witness P0434 recalls the pillaging and destruction of his properties by anti-Balaka on 22nd January 2014. In one video that the witness provided, we can see the extent of the damage. As the video is without sound and only an excerpt, it can be viewed publicly. P0434, devoid of property, like so many Muslims of Bangui, fled to Cameroon in early 2014. For counts 2 to 4, there is evidence that Bangui civilians also took part in some of these destructions. Even though all destructions may not have been committed by anti-Balaka only, testimonial and documentary evidence corroborate that the anti-Balaka, with their manpower and organization, played a key role in it. They had taken control of Bangui at the latest after Jatodia's resignation. Concerning counts 5 to 6, Your Honors have just seen the destruction of the property of P0434. But the suffering of his family did not end there. After the properties were destroyed, he and his family sought refuge and fled to Cameroon in February 2014. His extended family took refuge in PK5, as this at the same time was the safest place for Muslims. The witness's extended family was then escorted from PK5 to Bangui Airport, from where, like so many others, the International Organization for Migration evacuated them. Similarly, witness P1452 explains that as the anti-Balaka continued to attack PK5, he also had to evacuate his family to Chad. This was in January 2014. He himself later also had to leave Kar after his businesses had been destroyed by anti-Balaka. Like P1452, P1676 describes the decision to leave PK5 with his family and out of fear of the anti-Muslim violence at the time. The prosecution has interviewed more witnesses who describe that from 5th December onwards, the anti-Balaka acts directed at civilians left thousands of Muslim civilians with no choice but to leave their homes and flee to other parts of Kar or to neighboring countries such as Cameroon or Chad. Witness P2328, who had a good overview of the situation at the time, and I quote him in French, "Entre janvier et mars 2014, toute la population musulmane de Bangui avait pris peur. Les musulmans avaient donc décidé de quitter la ville, surtout face au harcèlement des anti-Balaka." End of quote. And, Your Honors, the anti-Balaka elements in Bangui were vocal about these intentions. For instance, they told Human Rights Watch that they would kill Muslims remaining in the neighborhoods of PK12, PK13, Miskeen, and PK5. I'm referring here to CAR OTP 2001-2237. In this video, which I would like to play for you now, you can see hundreds of Muslims who stayed at the airport of Bangui in the hope of being evacuated to Chad, thus transforming the airport also into a refugee camp. This video is in English.
Hundreds of Muslims are here, sheltering for now amidst what remains of the National Air Force. This imam told me his mosque was burnt down, his parents murdered, everything stolen, all by the Christian militia, the anti-Balaka.
Tens of thousands more fled on road convoys. P2698 described how by around the 20th December 2013, the majority of Muslims in PK5 had fled in a number of large vehicles brought in from Chad and taken to Cameroon or Chad. On your screen, Your Honors, you can see photos of remaining Muslims sheltering at the PK5 mosque and of a convoy leaving on 14th January 2014 from PK5. On the next slide, images of Muslim civilians having to flee Bangui on 1st of April are captured. P1577 recounts that end of January 2014, he came across the only Muslim family left in an area around PK13, PK14. This family had to be accompanied by French forces to an enclave to save them from anti-Balaka who had threatened to kill them. This witness also saw the evacuations by the convoys. He said, "The Muslims had no choice but to leave." Reports by organizations such as the Commission of Inquiry and Médecins Sans Frontières, for example, indicate that approximately 99% of the city's Muslim population had to flee by March 2014, and that 80% of the entire country's Muslim population fled to Cameroon or Chad in this period. Bangui had been emptied of its Muslim population by at least, in large part, the actions of the anti-Balaka. Regarding Count 7, those civilians who fled due to the anti-Balaka attacks against them but were not able to reach a neighboring country were trapped in PK5 around the central mosque area. They were thus deprived of their liberty. This is confirmed by witnesses P1339 and P2328, for instance. Specifically, Muslim civilians were unable to leave this area due to the constant and conspicuous threat of violence by the anti-Balaka if they tried to do so. P1339, for example, stated that after the attack on 5 December, Muslims from Boeing all fled to PK5 to the central mosque. Another witness described how on 5th December he and 11 other family members quickly left their home in a neighborhood in Bangui and also fled for their lives to PK5. P2328 states that in the aftermath of the December attack, Muslims from all over Bangui had to seek refuge around the central mosque because the anti-Balaka had started to go after the Muslim population. He describes how anti-Balaka were harassing the Muslims in PK5, outside of PK5 enclave, by shooting their weapons. Another witness, P2472, stated that the enclave was encircled by anti-Balaka so that Muslims could not leave. He also described how bodies were regularly brought to the Ali Babolo Mosque and that many Muslims in PK5 saw those bodies who were killed in a brutal manner. Being encircled like this and seeing these dead bodies worked as a threat and confined the Muslim civilians to the enclave. There, they had to endure a lack of adequate food, shelter, and sanitation. Contemporaneous NGO reports, information gathered by the Commission of Inquiry, as well as journalists and victims, describe the humanitarian condition in the enclave. I refer you, for example, to the statement of witness P1865, which is at CAR OTP 2066-0134 at paragraph 47. The Commission of Inquiry also reported that because of the siege on this enclave, the Muslims holed up there suffered from lack of food and medicine and could not find burying ground or cemeteries for their dead in that time. On your screen, you see an example of how Muslims lived in this enclave at the relevant time. In this way, the anti-Balaka severely deprived thousands of Muslims in Bangui, in the PK5 enclave, of their physical liberty, in violation of fundamental rules of international law, and in the aftermath of the 5 December attack. This is charged under count 7. Your Honors, the criminal acts in relation to Bangui that I've just described were committed by anti-Balaka elements in Bangui. They also form part of the underlying acts of persecution, which is charged as count 8. The anti-Balaka targeted the Muslim civilian population because, based on their religious, political, national, or ethnic affiliation, they perceived them as collectively responsible or complicit with, supportive of the Seleka. The anti-Balaka therefore carried out the crimes I just described with the intent to discriminate on multiple prohibited grounds. The persecutory intent to target the Muslim population coexisted alongside the anti-Balaka's desire to regain power and the desire for revenge. The two were closely associated. The pattern I've described shows that the victims were targeted based on their actual or perceived Muslim religion. The perpetrators attacked their places of worship, like mosques and prayer rooms. The fact that the victims were perceived as politically affiliated to and supportive of Seleka shows also that the victims were targeted on political grounds. We will get further into the statements provided by insider witnesses and public statements of anti-Balaka elements and high-ranking anti-Balaka in Mokom's responsibility section. But at this point, I would already like to refer you to the evidence of P2625 at CAR OTP 2123 0377 paragraph 133, where he explains that all Muslims were considered Seleka, and in his court testimony, where he stated that everything seemed to show that there was a plan to liquidate the Muslims, and this was a response to the violations committed by the Seleka. Of Mr. Mokom has spoken of these this morning himself. By the same token, ethnicities such as Gula, Runga, Yulu, Kara, Sara, Pearl, and Hausa, associated with certain national origins like Chad or Sudan, were perceived as supportive of Seleka and therefore targeted by national or ethnic grounds. So far, I refer you to CAR OTP 2088-2034, which is a speech of a leading anti-Balaka member, an interview given on 5th December. The anti-Balaka's attack on the Muslim civilians severely deprived them of fundamental rights, including the right to liberty, mental and bodily integrity, dignity, property, and religious freedom. My previous submissions under counts 2 to 4, counts 5 to 7, counts 8, also qualify as the underlying conduct for the war crime of directing attacks against the civilian population. Civilians not taking part in the hostilities were one of the objects of the attack. In addition to fighting the Seleka forces, the anti-Balaka also intended to target Muslim civilians in Bangui. They did not halt their attacks on these civilians after the Seleka had withdrawn. Witness P1528 stated that he learned after the 5 December attack that Christians had even been warned and placed palm leaves outside their homes to be spared by the anti-Balaka. I refer your honors to the statement and his trial testimony transcript at CAR OTP 2048-0757 at paragraph 33 and CAR OTP 00001031, page 27 onwards. Most of the destroyed homes were not the homes of Seleka elements. That Muslim civilians were also the object of the attack is not only inferred from the criminal conduct and its effects. Rather, your honors, you will hear the voices of anti-Balaka and their intention to attack Muslim civilians in Bangui when I cover the evidence in relation to the modes of liability. Let me now turn to Bosangoa. Mr. Mokom is charged with aiding and abetting, as well as otherwise contributing to the crimes of the anti-Balaka group in Bosangoa on 5 December, and the months afterwards until at least end of April 2014 here as well. Bosangoa lies to the north of Bangui in Wam province. In 2003, the population still included 8,000 Muslims. The evidence shows that the anti-Balaka groups were mostly comprised of the so-called Gobera group. Mr. Mokom has spoken of them himself this morning. This group attacked Bosongoa around 14 hours on 5th December. Witnesses provide evidence that they were led by Florent Kema and Ndangba Pasidi during this attack. Prior to the attack, there had been a meeting of anti-Balaka groups in the geographical area between Bangui and Bosongoa, and during this meeting, it had been decided who would attack Bosongoa and who would turn to Bangui. This attack was planned to take place on the same day as the Bangui attack. Again, during this attack and in its aftermath, the anti-Balaka turned their attention to targeting the Muslim population in Bosongoa. Florent Kema later told the UN panel of experts that, in addition to getting rid of the Seleka, the main objective of his group was to chase out all the Muslims of Wam province, where Bosongoa lies. The crimes against Muslims there show that this simplified message was taken on by anti-Balaka elements already during the attack. Your Honors, I will now turn to the charge of murder. In the course of the attack, the evidence demonstrates that at least 18 Muslim civilians were killed by anti-Balaka elements. These civilians were taking no active part in the hostilities. They were not armed. I refer Your Honors especially to the evidence of P-2200. The prosecution has direct evidence of the killings by eyewitnesses, as well as witnesses who saw the bodies of those killed. As provided by P-2462, P-2657, and P-2453, the identified victims were not taking part in armed hostilities as they were killed, and that the perpetrators were indeed anti-Balaka elements is also based on their descriptions. On your screen, Your Honors, you have an image of these victims at a building which was called Maison de Kolingba, close to the place where the bodies would then be buried. One of the victims was Khadija Ajaro. She was part of a group of Muslim civilians who had stayed in the borough neighborhood of Bosongoa and did not manage to flee. Khadija Ajaro was killed by bullet and her foot was ripped apart. Other dead bodies were found with hers. For further details, I refer you to the following references: CAR OTP 2088 to 173 and to 189, paragraphs 81 to 90, and CAR OTP to 1110415 at paragraph 67. Witness evidence in relation to these victims is supported by photographic imagery, for example, CAR OTP to 085 3982. Your Honors, in the course of this attack of the Bosongoa anti-Balaka group, at least 2 young Muslim women were raped by anti-Balaka elements, namely P-2462 and P-2657. Both women have provided their personal accounts, which is before you on the list of evidence. Both women were identifiable as Muslim on account of their clothing at the time. Both women suffer tremendously to this day from the effects of the rape. I will now turn to counts 14 and 15, attacks against buildings dedicated to religion, destruction of the adversary's property. Based on the accounts of several witnesses, such as P2200, P2049, P2133, P2453, and P2462, there are substantial grounds to believe that also hundreds of buildings of mostly residential nature were destroyed by anti-Balaka elements during and in the aftermath of the attack. The prosecution relies on the satellite imagery provided by UNISAT. This is at CAR OTP to 0790671, visible on the screen. According to UNISAT's analysis, 1,234 houses of a mostly residential nature and located in Muslim neighborhoods such as Boro were destroyed. In his trial testimony in the case of Yekatomina and Gaisona, P2193 commented also on a photo provided by P1577 of a destroyed structure, and he testified that what he saw and the type of destruction was consistent with what he could detect on the satellite imagery. I refer you to CAR OTP 00001-083 at pages 26 and 27. Your Honors, for the purpose of showing you the next video, I would like to request a short private session because it could otherwise be identifying, and that footage had been shown in private session in Yekatomina and Gaisona.
Mr. Court Officer, let's kindly move into private session.
We're back in open session, Mr. President.
Please continue.
Thank you. Thus, the evidence shows that the central mosque of Basangoa was reduced to ruins by anti-Balaka elements in the aftermath of the attack. Witnesses P2200, 2453, and 2462 provide evidence in relation of the timing of the destruction around 9th December 2013 by anti-Balaka elements. Your Honors, after the attack and in its course, aided also by civilians, anti-Balaka elements pillaged Muslim houses and shops with the intent to take the property for private or personal use. This property was appropriated without genuine and valid consent. In relation to this count, I refer Your Honors to the evidence cited in the DCC Annex for this count, and more specifically to the descriptions of P2049 and P2453. Furthermore, without grounds permitted under international law, and by expulsion or other coercive effects, the anti-Balaka forced Muslim civilians in Bossangoa of all ages, including children and the elderly, to leave their homes and communities where they were lawfully present. This is captured under counts 17 to 18. These civilians sought refuge at École de la Liberté. The prosecution has collected satellite imagery, analyzed by UNICEF, showing the sudden appearance of tent shelters at the school at the relevant time. Compare this image taken on 4th December 2013 on your screen with this image taken on 12th December 2013. It clearly reveals the development of the shelter. Again, the catalyst for this movement of people to this place was clear. The Muslims there fled there because the anti-Balaka had attacked their neighborhoods and destroyed their property, and they feared for their lives. And the conditions at this school compound were horrible. The refugees had to be protected by soldiers. You can see these conditions in an excerpt of this video, which was broadcast on 17th December 2013. It is in the English language.
Meters from the Christian camp, 7,000 displaced Muslim refugees are living here in a camp set up on the site of a school. They have weapons. I've seen that for myself, she says. They came from the church and they broke everything. They stole everything.
P0966 states that the anti-Balaka elements cleansed the houses in Bossangoa of Muslims so that Christians could go back to their lives. He states that they put women and children in the Liberté neighborhood of Bossangoa. The evidence as cited in our DCC annex shows that by the end of April 2014, virtually the entire Muslim population remaining in Bossangoa had been evacuated, mainly to Chad, to prevent them from being killed. Muslim civilians of all ages were also deprived of their liberty. The anti-Balaka prevented them from leaving on threat of death while they were holed up at the École de la Liberté. They had to be protected by international forces. P2657 recalled that these forces were protecting the refugees and that they were afraid to leave the refugees, It was like a prison, this witness says. Several witnesses also speak of a case concerning a man named Yaya Makonzi, who had been hacked to death after leaving the école. The incident further entrenched their sense that they could not leave the enclave without risking death. The conduct described related to Bossangoa also meets the elements of persecution as charged under count 20. By targeting the Muslim civilian population of Bossangoa in these ways, on the basis of their real or perceived national, political, religious, or ethnic affiliation, the anti-Balaka acted with a persecutory intent. The previous submissions under counts 10 to 11, counts 14 to 16, counts 17 to 19, and count 20 also qualify as the underlying conduct for the war crime of directing attacks against the civilian population. And as stated above, the attack against these civilians was planned, and it intentionally targeted Muslim civilians. Your Honors, the evidence demonstrates that the contextual elements of crimes against humanity and war crimes are also met. Based on our written submissions, the presentation of the evidence in the opening statement in relation to the pattern of criminality against Muslim civilians, as well as the presentation related to the charged crimes, there are substantial grounds to believe that these charged crimes were committed as part of a widespread and systematic attack against the civilian population. The attack was carried out pursuant to an anti-Balaka policy to target the Muslim civilian population in Western Kar, because they were perceived as collectively responsible for the crimes committed by the Seleka, or otherwise complicit with or supportive of the Seleka. The evidence further shows that the charged crimes were committed in the context of a protracted non-international armed conflict. Your Honors, I see the time is approaching 1 o'clock. I would now start on Mr. Mokom's responsibility. However, we could also do that after the break. I'm in your hands here.
We will finish a bit later than 1 to make up for some of the lost
All
time.
right.
So just please continue till 1:05, more or less.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. President, Your Honors, Mr. Mokom is charged under 2 alternative modes of liability, Article 25.3c and Article 25.3d. The evidence demonstrates that by mid-2013, key Bouzizi allies, such as Patrice Edouard Ngaisona and Bernard Mokom, had designed a strategy to reclaim power in Kar and militarily oust the Seleka and its perceived supporters. The evidence also demonstrates that, while implementing this strategy, the group of anti-Balaka who committed the crimes against Muslim civilians acted pursuant to a common purpose under 25.3d. And this purpose entailed targeting Muslim civilians, including by means of the charged crimes. And Your Honors, Mr. Mokom was no mere bystander or functionary. Rather, he was an important force within the anti-Balaka, who was both sophisticated and well-informed. Someone who, through his family connections to President Bouzizi and his past positions, was involved in, or at least highly aware, of the ongoing armed conflict in Kar. Someone who was well connected due to his intelligence and police background and long-standing relationship with Bouzizi and his inner circle. Someone who was well informed about Kar history and politics. Someone who knew that the anti-Balaka was largely comprised of ad hoc troops with minimal or no training, who had joined the fight because they were angry and had a serious axe to grind. We have heard him this morning. Someone who, as anti-Balaka operations coordinator, was in constant contact with high-rank elements and troops on the ground and kept abreast of their operations before and after the 5 December attack. In these circumstances, as I will explain in more detail shortly, Mr. Mokom must have known, as any reasonable person in his situation would have known, that the large-scale attacks and subsequent operations in Basangoa and Bangui would foreseeably result in abuses, like the ones charged, against the Muslim civilian population. The scale of the crimes, their temporal and geographical scope, their consistent pattern, same modus operandi, same type of perpetrator, same type of victim, show that the anti-Balaka perpetrators of the charged crimes did not act independently from one another, but as a group of persons acting in concert. P0287, who was a close observer of the situation, understood that the objective of the Anti-Balaka generally was to chase out the Seleka. But because they made an association between Seleka, Sudanese, Chadians, foreigners, they would group them all together as their enemy. In the lower ranks, explains the witness, the perceived enemy simply became Muslims in general. That the anti-Balaka groups who were committing the crimes had in common a purpose is further shown by the anti-Muslim sentiments expressed by rank and file, but also high-rank anti-Balakas who were close to Mr. Mokom. This next short video is from Bosangoa in October 2013. In it, an anti-Balaka element describes how the Seleka killed and decapitated his brother. Then another anti-Balaka explains, they kill Muslim civilians because, and I quote, they do the same to us. And you can watch this video now.
Les Sélékas ont pris une épée, ils lui ont crevé les yeux, ils l'ont décapité, ils l'ont découpé, là et là. Je m'étais enfui. Quand ils ont quitté le village, je suis revenu. J'ai pris un drap, j'ai ramassé les morceaux de mon frère, je les ai déposés dans un fossé.
Des jeunes rongés par un désir de vengeance sans fin, qui s'abat aussi sur les musulmans civils, jugés trop proches des anciens rebelles.
Donc les musulmans, quand on les trouve dans la brousse, on les tue parce qu'ils font pareil avec nous.
In the next excerpt, which is from CAR OTP 2065-3188, taken on 10th December 2013 in an anti-Balaka camp in Boeing neighborhood, you will hear an anti-Balaka element showing a tear gas gun. He explains that they use it to drive Muslims from their homes so they can kill them all, including the children.
Bon, tout simplement pour lancer, soi-disant, les musulmans qui sont dans leur maison, pour qu'ils puissent sortir et puis étouffer. Et puis dès qu'ils sortent, on les tue. Même les petits enfants aussi, on les tue.
Your Honors, the next slide is an excerpt video taken from a recorded interview dated 13th of December 2013, in which Your Honors can hear and see Silvestre Yaguzu, an anti-Balaka spokesperson. Yaguzu, who also took part in 5 December attack, was a close associate of Mr. Mokom, and there is evidence that he later became his deputy when the National Coordination was founded. Hear his own words in the following video.
Notre message, nous les anti-Balaka, c'est moi le porte-parole. Je dis ceci, je demande à ce fameux président qui se dit Dotouja, il démissionne. Il démissionne. Je lui donne 24 heures. 24 heures, je dis bien 24 heures qu'il démissionne. Pour sauver, s'il est conscient, s'il démissionne, ça veut dire qu'il a sauvé les centrafricaines musulmanes. Mais au cas contraire, s'il ne démissionne pas, nous on va faire le massacre. Ça c'est clair.
These excerpts show that the anti-Balaka group shared the common purpose to target the Muslim civilians, a purpose that was rooted in vengeance and hatred on account of unspeakable atrocities the Seleka perpetrated largely, if not only, against non-Muslim civilians. But Tukwokwe is not a defense in law. it explains the anti-Balaka's rationalization of their own conduct. If I have a little bit more time before the break, I will go into Mr. Mokom's contributions now. Yes? 5 minutes?
5 minutes, yes.
All right. Your Honors, Mr. Mokom, on the basis of the evidence before you, contributed in at least 4 ways to the charged crimes. Firstly, by helping organize and structure the anti-Balaka right from its earliest days, especially by supporting the Gobera group, and then later on in his role as official coordinator in Bangui. Secondly, by providing material support, in particular ammunition. Thirdly, by helping coordinate the movement of fighters and in the design of the attacks themselves. Fourthly, by providing advice, instructions, moral support, and encouragement to anti-Balaka fighters on the ground, both before and after the charged attacks and within the charged period. Given that these contributions overlap factually, I will address them jointly, but chronologically, distinguishing 2 periods. First, I will address the period when Mr. Mokom was still in exile in Zongo. And then second, I will address the period with a particular focus on after he had relocated to Bangui. Let's first turn to Mr. Mokom's contributions while he was still residing in Zongo, in particularly his contributions to the 5 December attacks on Bangui and Bossangoa. Mr. Mokom's contributions to the overall development of the anti-Balaka are important, as they improve the capability of the anti-Balaka as a fighting force, and thereby made it more possible for the charged crimes to eventually occur. The prosecution can rely on at least 12 insiders who show that Mr. Mokom was a person of influence within the groups. He liaised with key anti-Balaka figures, both those on the ground in CAR and leadership figures in exile in Cameroon, Democratic Republic of the Congo, and other places, meaning that he spoke with them, he strategized with them, and he supported the movement as a whole from Zongo. The witnesses I refer to are in particular P0446, P0884, P0889, P099966, P1172, P1339, P1521, P1719, P1847, P2232, P2269, and P2328. Multiple of these insiders also report that Mr. Mokom helped arrange ammunition and weapons for the anti-Balaka in advance of the 5 December attacks. And to deal with this issue, I would request a private session, but maybe we do that after the break.
Yes, we can pause here. You have more roughly had already 1 hour. Before I adjourn the hearing, you will need to specify the ERNs of item of evidence you have referred to earlier. You kindly do this at the beginning of next session, and from then on, just refer to the numbers anytime you present an item of evidence for the records and for the transcripts. So now I will adjourn the hearing for 90 minutes, so we will start again at 14:35. Thank you very much.
All rise, we will away.